I never thought a simple St. Michael keychain would be the weapon I'd use to escape the house of horrors where my own blood imprisoned me. Some scars can be hidden, but those I carry in my soul are like invisible tattoos that only I can see. Good morning, my dears. I'm Eleanor Ellie Jane Harrington. I'm 82 years old, and today I've decided to open my heart and tell a story I've kept silent for more than 6 decades. I was born in 1943 in Millfield, a small town in the Appalachian region of Ohio. It was a difficult time, the world at war, but our little piece of America seemed protected by mountains and the winding Ohio River that lazily snaked between the communities of Italian and German immigrants who formed our region. My mother, Margaret, was a washerwoman and ironer, a strong woman who raised 3 children practically alone after my father died in a mine collapse when I was only 5 years old. Our house was in the Pinewood neighborhood, a simple wooden structure, the kind that creaks with the winter winds during the harsh Ohio winters. We didn't have much, but we never lacked the basics. Mom had magic hands. She could transform a small piece of tough meat and some vegetables into the best stew you could ever taste. On Sundays, when there was a little extra money, she would make cornbread that my brothers and I would fight over. The boys left home early. August went first, at 16, to work at a steel mill in Pittsburgh. Nelson left at 17, finding work at a shoe factory in Cincinnati. It was just Mom and me, 2 women trying to survive in a world that seemed made for men. We would wake before sunrise, gather bundles of laundry to wash in the river, return laden to hang everything in the yard, and then came the work of ironing, folding, and delivering to the homes of the wealthier families in town. From a young age, I helped as I could. I learned to remove difficult stains with lemon and salt, to iron starched shirts without leaving a single mark, to fold large sheets by myself. Mom would say proudly, "Ellie has the gift, inherited her mother's hands." It was hard work, but dignified, and she always repeated, "Work tires the body, but enriches the soul, my child." At 13, I started attending night school at the local public school after work. Mom insisted, "I want you to have opportunities I never had, Ellie." She herself could barely sign her name, but understood the value of education. I loved English classes, losing myself in books that teacher Leonora lent me. They were windows to worlds I would never know, stories of people living lives so different from mine. On those school nights, I would return home late, walking through the dark streets of Millfield. I wasn't afraid. Everyone knew each other in town, and the few drunks who frequented the taverns on Main Street were harmless, more interested in their whiskey than in bothering a skinny girl like me. It was on one of those nights, returning from school, that I saw my mother through the window talking to an unfamiliar man in our living room. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, not since before my father's death. She had put on the blue dress she saved for special occasions, applied light pink lipstick, and her eyes sparkled. I stood watching that scene for a while, feeling a mixture of joy and a strange premonition I couldn't name. The man was Dale Harrison, as I later discovered. He owned a small farm in Crestview, the neighboring town, and had met my mother at the market where she sold some embroidered clothes to supplement our income. Dale was a widower with a son named Norman, who was 2 years older than me. He seemed like a decent man, always clean, well-dressed, spoke softly, and brought small gifts when he visited. A package of cookies, homemade jam, sometimes even a cut of fabric for Mom to make a new dress. My mother seemed to bloom again in his presence. She laughed more, hummed while working, took more care with her appearance. "He's a good man, Ellie," she told me. "Works hard on his land, takes care of what's his, respects women." I wanted to believe it. I really did. After so many years of struggle, Mom deserved a little happiness. 6 months after they started meeting, Dale proposed to Mom. It was on a Saturday night, after dinner. He brought a small orange cake and a simple but beautiful ring. Mom cried when he knelt in our modest living room and proposed. I felt a lump in my throat watching that scene. Part of me happy for her, part of me frightened by the change this would bring to our lives. Oh, my dears, if you're following my story so far, please do me a kindness and leave a comment letting me know what city you're watching from. This grandma is curious to know how far my voice is reaching. And if you can, please click that like button It really helps this old lady continue sharing her stories here. The wedding was simple, in the small St. John's Church, with few guests. Mom wore a beige dress she sewed herself, and I wore a light blue dress that Dale gave me as a gift. After the ceremony, there was a small lunch in the parish hall: chicken soup, roast beef, salads, and a two-tiered cake that Mrs. Emma, Mom's friend, made with care. It was a beautiful day, full of promises of a better life. 2 weeks after the wedding, we moved to Dale's house in Crestview. It was a pretty place, a white-painted brick house with a porch in front, surrounded by fruit trees and a small vegetable garden in the back. The farm wasn't large, but it had a good piece of land where he grew corn, beans, and potatoes, as well as raising some chickens and pigs. It seemed like a dream after our cramped little house in Millfield. Norman, Dale's son, wasn't present when we arrived. His father explained that he had gone to Columbus to pick up some tools for work on the farm and would return in 2 days. Mom and I arranged our things in the room that would be mine, small but clean, with a window overlooking the orchard. Dale had prepared everything carefully, even placed a vase with wildflowers on the dresser. "I want you to feel at home, Ellie," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the first few days, everything seemed perfect. Dale was attentive to Mom, treated me with respect, and the farm work, though heavy, was rewarding in a way that washing and ironing clothes had never been. I helped in the garden, learned about plants, about planting and harvesting cycles. At night, we would sit on the porch drinking coffee and listening to the radio. Mom smiled more than I remembered seeing in my entire life. On the 3rd day, Norman arrived. He was a tall, thin young man with dark hair and deep-set eyes that always seemed to avoid direct contact. He had calloused hands from hard work and a quiet way of moving, almost as if trying not to be noticed. He greeted Mom with a shy nod and merely glanced at me before mumbling an almost inaudible, "Pleased to meet you." "Norman's just naturally quiet," Dale explained later when the young man had already retired to his room. "Since his mother died, he's become more withdrawn. But he's a good boy, hard-working." I believed him. I had no reason to doubt. Norman just seemed like a shy boy, perhaps even a bit socially awkward, like many young people raised in the isolation of rural life. In the days that followed, he barely spoke during meals, responded with monosyllables when someone addressed him, and spent most of his time working in the fields or tending to the animals. It was only after 2 weeks in the new house that I began to notice the first signs. Small details that, at the time, didn't seem important, but now, looking back, were warnings I should have perceived. The way Dale spoke louder when Norman took too long to complete a task. How the boy trembled slightly when his father approached. The long, strange looks Dale cast my way when he thought no one was watching. And then, one Sunday, everything changed. Mom woke up with a high fever, her whole body aching, barely able to get out of bed. Dale examined her with concern. "Looks like a bad case of flu," he said. "I'll go get Dr. Sullivan from town." I stayed caring for Mom while he left in the truck. I placed cold compresses on her forehead, made chamomile tea, tried to get her to eat some chicken broth that was left over from the day before. She slept a lot, woke up confused, her face red with fever. The doctor arrived in the middle of the afternoon, an elderly man with a white beard and gentle hands. He examined Mom carefully, listened to her chest, checked her throat. "It's pneumonia," he finally said. "We need to take good care. Margaret is no longer a young woman." He left some medicines, detailed instructions, and the promise to return in 2 days to see how she was doing. Dale took him back to town while I stayed by Mom's bedside, holding her fever-hot hand, saying all the prayers I knew for her to get better soon. But she didn't improve. The fever went up and down. She coughed more and more, a wet and deep sound that scared me. On the 3rd night, I woke to a moan coming from her room. I ran to see what it was and found Mom sitting up in bed, eyes wide, trying to breathe. "Eli!" she gasped, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "I'll call Dale!" I shouted, panicking. I ran to his room, knocked desperately on the door. He came out already dressed, as if he hadn't been sleeping. Together, we returned to Mom's room, but she had already lain back down, and her breathing was a frightening wheeze. "I'll go get the doctor," Dale said, grabbing his coat. "Stay with her, don't leave her side for a minute." I stayed. I held her hand, spoke words of comfort, tried to get her to drink a little water. But before Dale returned with the doctor, I felt her fingers relax in mine. Her labored breathing became slower, weaker, until it stopped completely. My mother had departed, taking with her everything I knew of safety and love in this world. The funeral was quick, simple. Some neighbors showed up, more out of consideration for Dale than for knowing Mom. She was buried in the small cemetery in Crestview, under a gray sky that seemed to cry the tears I couldn't shed. I was in shock, numbed by grief and fear of the future. What would become of me now? Where would I go? I was only 15, with no money, no place to call my own. "You'll stay here, of course," Dale said when we returned from the funeral. "You're family now, Ellie. I'll take care of you as if you were my own daughter." At that moment, his words seemed like a safe harbor amid the storm of my grief. I didn't notice the different gleam in his eyes, nor did I notice how Norman lowered his head, a muscle tensing in his jaw. I was blind to the signs, deaf to the warnings. I accepted Dale's offer with gratitude, without imagining I had just voluntarily entered a predator's cage. In the days following the funeral, I cried a lot alone in my room. During the day, I tried to keep busy with household chores, assuming the role that had once been Mom's: cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house. At night, I hugged the pillow and sobbed quietly so as not to disturb anyone. Dale seemed to respect my mourning, kept his distance, spoke little. Norman remained as elusive as ever, working from dawn to dusk, eating quickly, and retiring to his room as soon as possible. It was only after 2 weeks that I began to notice the changes. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Dale started taking more meals at home instead of bringing a packed lunch to the field. He began to observe me as I worked, making comments about how skilled and efficient I was. He started bringing small gifts from town: a hair ribbon, a scented soap, new socks. Kindnesses that seemed innocent, but came accompanied by looks that lasted too long, by accidental touches that made me uncomfortable. And Norman, the way he avoided me seemed different now. It wasn't just shyness, it was fear. When Dale was nearby, he barely looked in my direction, as if terrified of being caught observing me. And when his father wasn't around, he sometimes gave me quick glances, full of an emotion that at the time I couldn't identify, but that now I know was a silent, desperate warning. I was alone, vulnerable, trapped in a web I didn't even know existed. And the worst was yet to come. The day when darkness finally descended upon my life like an endless storm. A month after my mother's burial, on a Sunday afternoon, Dale's true face was finally revealed. I was finishing washing the lunch dishes when he entered the kitchen, closed the door behind him, and leaned against it, arms crossed, watching me with a look that made my blood freeze. "You know, Ellie," he began, his voice different from the paternal tone he usually used, "it's time we talked about your place in this house." I dried my hands on the apron, feeling a knot form in my throat. "What do you mean, Mr. Harrison? You don't need to call me Mr. anymore. I'm your stepfather now." He took a step in my direction. "And as a stepfather, I have responsibilities. One of them is to ensure you're properly educated." I nodded, confused. I'm trying to do everything right. Take care of the house as Mom taught me." He smiled, a smile I had never seen before, cold, calculating. "I'm not talking about that kind of education, girl. I'm talking about how a woman should behave in a home where men are the heads." It was then that I noticed Norman standing at the back door, looking at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. Dale saw him too and made an abrupt gesture. "Come here, boy. It's time for you to learn some things too." Norman entered reluctantly, keeping the greatest possible distance from me. He looked even paler than normal, almost sick. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice faltering, a chill in my stomach warning me that something terrible was about to happen. "What's happening, Ellie, is that in this house we follow the natural order of things. Men command, women obey." Dale came closer, now only an arm's length away. "And you're going to learn that today. And Norman also needs to learn to be a real man, not this shadow of a person who walks around afraid of his own shadow." I looked at the door, calculating if I would have time to run. As if reading my thoughts, Dale grabbed my arm forcefully, his fingers digging into my skin. Don't even think about it. Where would you go? There's no one in this world who cares about you now, girl. Only me and Norman. Your family now. The terror I felt at that moment is indescribable. His gaze no longer hid anything. It was pure, calculated, cruel, and I realized with horror that this moment wasn't impulsive or unexpected. He had planned everything, perhaps from the first day he laid eyes on me and my mother at the Millfield market. "Norman," he called, without taking his eyes off me, "come here and show that you're a man. Show that Harrison blood runs in your veins." Norman took a hesitant step, then another. He looked like he might vomit at any moment. "Dad, please. She's just a girl. Her mother just died." The slap was so quick and strong that Norman staggered backward. Dale had hit him with the back of his hand, leaving a red mark on his son's face. "Is that how a man talks?" Dale growled. "Is that how I raised you? To be a crying coward? I'm ashamed to call you my son." I saw tears in Norman's eyes, but he contained them quickly, straightening his shoulders, his jaw tense. At that instant, I understood the dynamic between them. Dale wasn't just my tormentor. He was Norman's too. And in some perverse way, he planned to use one of us to hurt the other. "Now," Dale continued, grabbing Norman's arm and pulling him closer, "I'm going to teach you to be a man. And you," he squeezed my arm harder, "are going to learn your place." What happened next is among the most painful memories of my life, things I try not to revisit, but that sometimes invade my dreams like persistent shadows. I was dragged to a room at the back of the house, a place I had never entered before, a kind of storage room converted into an office, with an old desk, some shelves with tools, and a cot against the wall. There was a large mirror hanging, a strange thing for a room like that. "Here no one will hear anything," Dale explained, locking the door behind us. "And you're going to look in that mirror while Norman shows he's a man." I begged, cried, tried to break free. Norman seemed paralyzed, his face a mask of horror and shame. Dale watched us with a sick satisfaction, like a cruel conductor directing an orchestra of suffering. "If you don't do what I'm ordering, boy," he said with frightening calmness, "I'll do it myself. And then I'll break your fingers one by one for disobeying me. Is that what you want?" Norman looked at me, his eyes asking for a forgiveness that wasn't his to grant. I saw in him not an accomplice, but another victim, a young man broken by years of abuse and fear, now forced to perpetuate the same cycle of violence. In the months that followed, that back room became my personal hell. Dale established a macabre routine. Certain nights after dinner, he would take me there under any pretext. "Lesson time," he would say with a cruel smile. Sometimes he forced Norman to participate. Other times he just watched, giving instructions, criticizing, humiliating his son when he showed any sign of gentleness or hesitation. "Look at the mirror," he always ordered. "I want you to see what's happening. I want you to learn." That mirror, with its dark, ornate frame, became the symbol of my degradation. Dale had a sick obsession with it, as if he needed not only for things to happen, but for them to be witnessed, recorded, multiplied by the reflection. During the day, life in the house followed an appearance of perverse normality. I cooked, cleaned, washed clothes. Dale worked in the field or went to town to sell produce. Norman took care of the animals, fixed fences, planted. We crossed paths in the house like ghosts, avoiding glances, carrying our secrets too heavy to bear. At night, in my room, I cried silently into the pillow, planning impossible escapes. Several times I thought of simply running, disappearing into the darkness, trying to reach Millfield on foot. But where would I go after that? Who would help me? A 15-year-old girl, with no money, no family, and Dale had made it clear what would happen if I tried to escape. "I have friends all over the region," he told me once, sharpening a hunting knife before my eyes. "You wouldn't even make it to Riverdale before they found you. And when they brought you back," he smiled, running his finger along the blade, "well, let's just say you would prefer not to have tried." After almost 3 months of that nightmare, I noticed a change in Norman. His eyes, previously constantly lowered and submissive, now sometimes shone with something that seemed like anger, determination. When Dale wasn't looking, he began to give me different looks, no longer of shame or guilt, but almost as if he wanted to tell me something. One morning, while I was hanging clothes on the line and Dale had gone to town, Norman approached, pretending to fix a nearby fence. "He'll kill me one day," he murmured, so low I almost didn't hear. "Or I'll kill him. I don't know which will happen first." I froze, a wet shirt dripping on my feet. It was the first time we had really spoken alone, without the immediate terror of Dale's presence. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, equally quietly, hanging the shirt with trembling hands. "Because you're trapped here too." He hammered a nail into the fence, the noise disguising our conversation. "And because we need a plan." I looked around nervously, as if Dale might emerge from the shadows at any moment. "What kind of plan?" "I don't know yet, but I can't continue doing what he forces me to do. I can't sleep anymore. I can't look at myself in the mirror without wanting to vomit." The mention of the mirror made my stomach turn. "Your father is dangerous," I whispered. "You yourself said he could kill you." "He's not my father." Norman's voice was so filled with hatred that I almost didn't recognize him. "A father doesn't do what he does. A father doesn't—" He stopped, breathing deeply. "He's not my real father. My mother was already widowed when she met him. I was 6 years old. He legally adopted me, but I was never really his son." This revelation hit me like lightning. Suddenly, many things made sense. The lack of physical resemblance, the particular cruelty Dale reserved for Norman, the way he constantly humiliated him. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because we need to trust each other if we want to survive." He drove in the last nail with excessive force. "Watch. Wait. I'll find a way to get us out of here." Before I could respond, we heard the distant sound of Dale's truck returning. Norman immediately moved away, returning to his usual posture of submission. I continued hanging clothes, my heart racing in my chest. That brief conversation lit a small flame of hope inside me. I wasn't completely alone. There was someone else who wanted to escape, someone who also suffered at the hands of that monster. We weren't accomplices to each other, as Dale wanted us to be. We were fellow prisoners, united by the desire for freedom. In the weeks that followed, we developed a silent system of communication. Looks, small gestures, coded words said in passing. We could never risk a long conversation. Dale seemed to have a sixth sense for detecting any alliance between us, and would be merciless if he discovered it. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. Dale was drinking more, becoming more violent, more unpredictable. The lessons in the back room became more frequent and brutal. He seemed especially satisfied when he could make Norman cry or beg him to stop. "Is this being a man?" he would taunt, holding the young man's face and forcing him to look in the mirror. "Look at yourself, crying like a little girl. What a shame. You can't even do this right." One night, after a particularly brutal session, when Dale finally left us alone in the room, something he rarely did, Norman approached me, trembling from head to toe. "I can't take it anymore," he whispered, tears streaming down his face marked by a recent cut, a gift from Dale for some imaginary disobedience. "He will destroy us completely if we stay here." I nodded, unable to speak, too exhausted even to cry. The mirror on the wall showed two broken figures, two young people whose lives had been stolen by a monster disguised as a man. "I have a plan," Norman continued, so quietly that I had to strain to hear. "But it's risky, and you'll need to be strong." "What plan?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "He's going to kill us one day, Ellie. You know that, don't you? This won't stop. It will only get worse. Especially now that he's drinking more." I knew. Deep down, I always knew that this couldn't continue indefinitely. Dale was like a time bomb, becoming more unstable every day. It was just a matter of time until his controlled violence completely exploded. "What can we do?" I asked, desperate for any thread of hope. "He has a weakness," Norman said, his eyes fixed on mine. "His pride, his sick idea of what it means to be a man. If we can use that against him, maybe we have a chance." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I nodded anyway. Any plan was better than no plan. Any hope better than absolute despair. "I'm going to need you to do something difficult," he continued. "Something that will seem wrong, but that might be our only way out." "Anything," I replied without hesitation. "I'll do anything to get out of here." Norman's plan began to unfold the next day. It was simple and risky at the same time, So risky that it still surprises me that we had the courage to try. But when you live under constant terror, the fear of death becomes less than the fear of continuing to live that way. The first step was to mess with Dale's pride, with his sick obsession with control and masculinity. And for that, I would need to do something that went against all my instincts. Start complimenting Norman in front of him. "Norman is getting stronger," I commented casually during dinner 2 days later. "Today I saw him carrying those corn sacks as if they weighed nothing." Dale raised his eyes from his plate, surprised by my unexpected comment. Norman kept his head down, but I saw a muscle tense in his jaw. "Strong?" Dale laughed with disdain. "That one? He can't even carry dead weight properly." "I'm just saying what I saw," I replied, trying to appear innocent. 3 sacks at once. Impressive." Dale looked at his son with an expression hard to read, something between suspicion and irritation. The first blow had been struck. The seed planted. In the days that followed, I continued with the subtle compliments. "Norman fixed the roof so quickly. Norman has a way with animals. Norman is getting strong arms from all the work." Each comment was like a small needle in the balloon of Dale's ego, provoking small explosions of anger that he tried, without much success, to disguise. At the same time, Norman began to behave slightly differently. Nothing too obvious. He still lowered his head when Dale shouted, still obeyed orders. But there were small changes. He began to respond in a slightly louder voice, to take a second longer to follow orders, to look his father in the eyes for a moment before looking away. It was a dangerous dance, a game of nerves that could end in tragedy at any moment. But it was working. I could see the suspicion growing in Dale, the paranoia fueled by alcohol and his own fragile ego. "What's going on between you two?" He cornered me in the kitchen one afternoon, holding my arm with enough force to leave marks. "Having little talks behind my back?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, my heart beating so hard I thought he might hear it. "I'm just doing my chores, as always." "Don't take me for a fool, girl," he growled, his breath sour with whiskey making me turn my face away. "I see how you look at Norman now, how you talk about him. What are you plotting?" "Nothing, I swear." The tears that ran down my face weren't pretended. The fear was real. The pain in my arm was real. "I just thought that it was what you wanted, for Norman to be more of a man." He studied me for a long moment, his bloodshot eyes, his heavy breathing. Finally, he released me with a push. "I'm watching you. Remember that." That night, there was a lesson in the back room. It was one of the worst. Dale was furious, out of control, alternating between violence against Norman and against me. But even amid that horror, we exchanged a quick look, Norman and I. A look that said, "It's working. The monster is afraid." The tension in the house grew in the following weeks. Dale drank more, watched more, suspected everything. Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night and went to check if we were in our rooms. He began to lock up tools that were previously in plain sight, as if fearing we might use them against him. Paranoia was eating him from the inside, exactly as we had planned. And then, on a stormy night, when the thunder shook the windows of the house and the rain fell in dense curtains, everything came to a breaking point. The storm that night seemed like an omen. Lightning cut the sky like knives of light, briefly illuminating our isolated house before plunging it back into darkness. Each thunder made the walls tremble, as if nature itself wanted to tear down that place of suffering. The rain hit the roof with such force that I feared it might collapse over our heads. We were all in the living room after dinner, a silent and tense meal, as had become the custom. Dale sitting in his worn leather armchair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his side. Norman mending a fishing net in a corner, eyes lowered but vigilant. I pretended to knit, needles moving automatically while my mind worked on our plan. "Norman," I called, keeping my voice casual, "that fence on the west side will need fixing after all this rain. You're so good at that, I'm sure you'll make it as solid as always." I saw Dale's fingers tighten around the whiskey glass. His eyes, bloodshot from alcohol, moved slowly from his son to me. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice thickened by drink. "I was just commenting about the fence," I replied, feigning innocence. "Norman always does such a good job with repairs." "Really?" Dale stood up, staggering slightly. Norman does such a good job. Norman is so strong. Norman this, Norman that. I'm tired of this drivel. A particularly strong thunder shook the house, as if underlining his words. I saw Norman straighten his back almost imperceptibly, preparing for what would come next. "What's going on between you two?" Dale demanded, pointing an accusing finger at us. "You think I'm blind? You think I'm stupid?" "Nothing's happening, Dad," Norman answered, his voice firmer than usual. "Dad!" Dale spat the word as if it were poison. "Now I'm Dad to you? Since when do you call me that with that tone?" "What tone?" Norman put the net aside and slowly stood up. "I just answered your question." It was like watching two animals preparing for a confrontation. Dale, the aging predator, feeling his territory threatened. Norman, the young challenger, testing his strength for the first time. And me, caught between them, both catalyst and spectator to that storm that wasn't just the one raging outside. "You think you're a man now?" Dale took a step toward his son. "You think you can challenge me in my own house?" "I'm not challenging anyone," Norman replied, but his body said otherwise. Shoulders back, chin raised, hands relaxed at his sides, ready. "No? And these looks? These whispers with the girl? You think I don't see what you're plotting?" "You're drunk," Norman said simply. "There's nothing to see." That was the last straw. Dale advanced like an enraged bull, throwing the coffee table aside with a crash. Norman dodged the first blow, but wasn't fast enough to avoid the second. A punch that hit him in the stomach, doubling him over. "Is this being a man?" Dale roared, kicking his fallen son. "Is this how you challenge me?" I jumped up, the knitting falling forgotten to the floor. "Stop! You'll kill him!" Dale turned to me, his eyes wild, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "Shut up, you little tramp. You're the cause of all this, filling his head with these ideas." He advanced toward me, his hand raised to hit me. That's when it happened. Norman, still on the floor, grabbed his stepfather's ankle and pulled with all his might. Dale fell backward with a dull thud, his head hitting the corner of the stone fireplace. The silence that followed was more frightening than all the previous shouting. Just the sound of the storm outside, the crackling of the fire in the fireplace, and our labored breathing. Dale rose slowly, his hand on the back of his head. When he brought it back, it was stained red. Blood. His face, already flushed from drink, now took on an even darker hue, almost purple. "You attacked me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My own son attacked me." "I'm not your son," Norman replied, standing up with difficulty. "I never was." Dale looked at him for a long moment, then at me, then back at him. Something changed in his face, the anger giving way to a calculated coldness that was even more frightening. "Very well," he finally said. "If that's how you want to play, let's play." He staggered over to the cabinet in the corner of the room, the one he always kept locked. He took a key from his pants pocket, opened it, and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. A hunting shotgun, old but well-maintained. "Dale! No!" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. He ignored me completely, focused on loading the weapon with movements that, despite his drunkenness, were precise and familiar. "I never thought it would come to this," he muttered, more to himself than to us. My own blood turning against me. "I'm not your blood," Norman repeated, his voice trembling but determined. "And you know that." Dale raised the shotgun, pointing it first at Norman, then at me, then back at him, as if he couldn't decide which of us deserved to die first. "Maybe I should start with her," he said, fixing the barrel of the gun in my direction. "Make you watch, to learn the final lesson." I closed my eyes, waiting for the shot, a strange calm invading me. Perhaps death would be preferable to that life of terror. Perhaps finally, I would find peace. But the shot didn't come. Instead, I heard a cry of rage and the sound of bodies colliding. When I opened my eyes, Norman and Dale were fighting for control of the shotgun, rolling across the living room floor, knocking over furniture, breaking objects. "Run!" Norman shouted to me, holding Dale's wrists with all his strength. "Run, Ellie!" I was paralyzed for a second, unable to abandon him. But then the shotgun fired, a deafening boom that seemed to make the entire house shudder. The bullet lodged in the ceiling, causing a shower of plaster to fall on us. "Go!" Norman shouted again, and this time my body obeyed. I ran to the kitchen, to the back door, but it was locked. Dale always locked it at night and kept the key with him. I ran back to the hallway, hearing the sounds of the fight continuing in the living room. Another detonation, the sound of glass breaking. My room had a small window, perhaps too small for an adult to pass through, but I was skinny, desperate. I ran there, closed the door behind me, pushed the dresser against it to gain a few seconds if Dale came after me. I opened the window. The rain immediately entered, soaking the windowsill, the floor, my face. Outside, almost complete darkness, except for the occasional lightning that revealed the muddy yard, the garden, the fence. Freedom. I began to squeeze through the narrow opening, feeling the rough wood scratch my arms, tear my dress. I was almost succeeding when I heard a final shot, and then a silence that seemed louder than all the thunder. I froze, half my body inside, half outside, the rain punishing my back. Who had fired? Who had been hit? Should I go back to help Norman or continue my escape? Before I could decide, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway, the knob of my bedroom door turning, a body throwing itself against the wood, the dresser moving a few inches with the impact. "I know you're in there, girl," Dale's voice, hoarse with fury. "You won't escape." Another bang against the door, the dresser moving more. There was no more time for hesitation. With one last, desperate effort, I threw myself through the window, falling awkwardly in the mud outside, feeling a sharp pain in my ankle. But there was no time for pain. I got up and ran, limping, slipping in the mud, the rain blinding me, the lightning briefly showing the way. I ran toward the barn, the only place where I could hide. Behind me, I heard the window of my room breaking completely, Dale trying to follow me through the same path. I didn't look back, focused only on putting one foot in front of the other, on not falling, on reaching the temporary shelter the barn offered. When I finally reached the barn door, my hands were so wet and trembling that I could barely pull the bolt. Finally, I managed, slipped inside and closed the door behind me, putting the latch in place. The barn was pitch black, smelling of damp hay and animals. The cows mooed nervously at my abrupt entrance. The horses stomped in their stalls. "Where are you, girl?" Dale's voice came from outside, too close, making my heart nearly stop. "You have nowhere to go. Better surrender now. Maybe I'll be merciful." I crouched in the dark, trying to control my labored breathing, desperately searching for some weapon, some defense. My fingers found a pitchfork leaning against the wall, heavy, with sharp prongs, an improvised weapon, but better than nothing. The barn door shuddered, Dale trying to get in, discovering it was locked. I heard a roar of frustration, then the sound of something heavy being used against the wood. He was trying to break down the door. I retreated to the back of the barn, the pitchfork firm in my hands. If he came in, I would fight. I wouldn't die like a cornered animal, not after all I had been through, all I had endured. The door began to give way under the repeated blows, wood cracking, splinters flying. One more blow, and he would be inside. I prepared myself, raising the pitchfork in attack position. It was then that I heard something unexpected. A different scream, not of rage but of pain, followed by the sound of a body falling heavily. The blows to the door stopped abruptly. A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of rain on the barn roof and the nervous breathing of the animals. "Ellie?" A weak voice called from outside. It wasn't Dale. "Norman?" I approached the door cautiously. "Is that you?" "Yes." "Open." "Quick." I hesitated for only a second before removing the latch and opening a crack in the door. What I saw made me open it completely. Norman, soaked by the rain, blood mixing with water on his face, one of his hands pressing the side of his body where more blood was flowing. At his feet, Dale lying face down in the mud, motionless. My God, what happened? I pulled Norman inside, closing the door again. "He shot me. In the living room." Norman coughed, a wet and frightening sound. "But just a graze. Managed to follow him when he came after you. And Dale, is he?" "Yes." The answer came simple, direct. "I hit him with a shovel when he was trying to break down the door." Too hard, I think. He fell and didn't move again. A wave of contradictory emotions invaded me. Relief, horror, fear, a strange sense of emptiness. Dale, the monster who had turned my life into hell, was dead. We were alive. But what would happen now? "We need to get out of here," Norman said, as if reading my thoughts. "If someone discovers—" "But you're hurt." I looked at the blood that continued to flow between his fingers. "We need to take care of that first. There's no time. Joe Turner comes to bring feed for the pigs tomorrow morning. If he finds Dale—" He was right. Even if it was legitimate self-defense, who would believe us? An adopted boy and an orphaned girl, living isolated with a man respected in the community. They would say we planned everything, that we killed him to take his land, his money. It would be our word against a corpse, and corpses have a strange power of sanctification. Bad people suddenly become martyrs in death. "Where will we go?" I asked, my mind working quickly. "Columbus," Norman replied. "It's big enough for us to lose ourselves there. I have an uncle, my real mother's brother. He never liked Dale, always suspected him. Maybe he'll help us. How will we get there? The truck makes too much noise, and with this rain—" "The horse. We can ride Thunder. He's strong enough to carry us both." The plan was risky, almost suicidal. Leaving in a storm, at night, on muddy roads, with Norman injured, with no money, no dry clothes, no food. But what was the alternative? Staying meant certain imprisonment, perhaps even hanging. Quickly, we prepared Thunder, the strongest and most resistant horse we had. I put some improvised bandages on Norman's wound, using strips torn from my own dress. We took wool blankets we kept in the barn for colder days, some apples that were stored in a box, a small knife that Norman kept hidden for cutting ropes. Before we left, Norman did something that surprised me. He went back to Dale's body, crouched with difficulty, and took something from his pocket. "What is that?" I asked when he returned. "His savings," he replied, showing a small leather pouch. "He always kept it on him, didn't trust banks. It will help us start a new life." There was something poetic about that. The money that Dale had accumulated with such jealousy would now finance our escape, our liberation. As if, even in death, he was forced to do something good. We mounted Thunder, me in front, Norman behind me, one arm around my waist to hold on, the other still pressing the wound. And so we departed, under torrential rain, leaving behind the house that had been my prison for almost a year, the body of the man who had been our jailer, and the mirror that had witnessed so many horrors. The journey to Columbus was a blur of pain, exhaustion, and fear. We avoided main roads, following farm trails, open fields, skirting rivers. The rain continued for hours, then diminished to a persistent drizzle, then stopped completely, leaving a foggy and cold dawn. Norman, increasingly weak from blood loss, almost fell from the horse several times. I held him as best I could, murmuring words of encouragement, promising we would arrive soon, that we would be all right. After almost a full day of travel, we reached the outskirts of Columbus. The city seemed gigantic to my eyes accustomed to small towns, tall buildings, paved streets, buses, automobiles, people everywhere. We stopped in a more remote area, where Norman thought his uncle lived. "Oak Street," he murmured, his voice weak. "Number 237, Uncle Gerald Oliver." We asked, searched, finally found it. A simple but well-kept house with a small garden in front. It was the uncle's wife who answered the door, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes that widened in horror at the state we were in. "Good Lord, what happened to you?" "We need to see Uncle Gerald," Norman managed to say before fainting in the woman's arms. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Norman being carried inside, a doctor being discreetly called, questions being asked and partially answered. I told an edited version of the truth, that Dale mistreated us, that he had tried to kill us, that we had fled. I didn't mention that he was dead, nor how he had died. Some truths are too heavy to share, even with well-intentioned people. Gerald and his wife Martha were good people, the kind who don't ask too many questions when they see someone in need. They took care of us, gave us shelter, food, clean clothes. The doctor treated Norman's wound. Fortunately, the bullet had only grazed his ribs without penetrating deeply. With proper care, he would recover completely. In the weeks that followed, we anxiously waited for news from Crestview. Surely Dale's body would be found. Surely there would be an investigation. Surely they would come after us. But surprisingly, nothing happened. Later we discovered why. The storm that night had caused a flash flood in the river that ran near the property. Dale's property, located in a low-lying area, had been partially flooded. When they finally found his body, days later, they presumed he had been a victim of the flood, perhaps trying to save the animals, perhaps surprised by the water while checking the damage to the barn. The blow to the head was attributed to some debris carried by the current. It was such an extraordinary stroke of luck that sometimes I wonder if it wasn't some kind of divine intervention, as if nature itself wanted to erase the traces of our desperate act, give us a chance to start over without the weight of that death on our consciences. And we did start over. Slowly, painfully, but with determination. Gerald arranged a job for Norman in a friend's auto repair shop. I started working as a seamstress assistant in a nearby atelier. We were young, hard-working, determined to build something better than the horror we had left behind. At first, we slept in separate rooms in the uncle's house, I with their youngest daughter, Norman, in the small back room. We didn't talk about what had happened between us in Dale's house. It was like a silent agreement that had been under coercion. It hadn't been real. It didn't define who we were. But gradually, something began to change. Not romantically, not immediately. It was more like a deep understanding, a connection forged in the fire of shared suffering. Norman and I were the only ones in the world who knew exactly what the other had been through. The only ones who understood the nightmares, the startles at unexpected noises, the fear of large mirrors. Over time, this understanding transformed into something more. A year after our arrival in Columbus, Norman asked me to marry him. It was simple, direct, without exaggerated romance. We weren't people for whom romance came easily, not after what we had lived through. "We don't have to," I said, uncertain. "We can continue as we are, friends, companions. I want to build something new with you," he replied. "Something clean, honest, based on choice, not on fear or obligation." I married Norman in a small ceremony at Uncle Gerald's house, with only his family present. I was 17, he was 19. We were too young, carried too many scars. But we also had a fierce determination to create something beautiful from pain, to not allow Dale, even dead, to continue controlling our lives. Our married life began with care, with infinite patience from both sides. There were nights when I couldn't bear to be touched, nights when he woke up screaming, reliving horrors in dreams. But there were also moments of tenderness, of mutual discovery, of slow but constant healing. 2 years after our marriage, our first child was born, a healthy boy whom we named Gabriel, Strength of God. It was as if his arrival marked a new chapter, a page definitively turned. Looking at that perfect little face, I silently promised that he would never know the kind of violence his parents had lived through, would never know what we had done to survive. The years passed. We had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy. Norman prospered at the shop, eventually becoming a partner. I continued at the sewing atelier, developing a special talent for delicate embroidery that was much sought after for wedding trousseaux. We bought a modest house in the Greenview neighborhood, raised our children with love and firmness, built a life that, seen from the outside, seemed perfectly normal. But some scars never completely disappear. Norman never raised his voice to me or the children, not even in moments of greatest frustration. I could never have a large mirror in the house, just small ones, enough to comb hair or check if a face was clean. We taught our children about respect and consent before they even knew what those words meant. And each year, on the anniversary of that stormy night, we lit a candle. Not for Dale, but for ourselves. For the young people we had been. For the horror we had survived. For the choice we had made not to allow the darkness to consume us completely. Norman departed before me, a heart attack at 67, quick and merciful. He left me with 4 adult children, 11 grandchildren, and memories of a life that, despite its terrible beginning, was marked by more joy than sadness, more love than pain. And now, at 82, looking back, I see not just the horror of that year in Crestview, but all the path traveled since then. The choices we made, the lives we saved, including our own. The small St. Michael keychain I mentioned at the beginning? It was a gift from Norman on my 18th birthday, shortly after we arrived in Columbus. "To protect you when I can't," he said. I still carry it with me today, a reminder not of danger, but of protection, not of fear, but of courage. That St. Michael keychain accompanied me throughout my life, like a small anchor reminding me that I survived the worst. The truth, my dears, is that our escape was just the beginning of the story, not the end. Rebuilding a life after trauma isn't like in the movies, where the screen darkens after the rescue and everyone lives happily ever after. It's daily work, a constant struggle against the ghosts that insist on visiting us. Our life in Columbus began in 1959 in a borrowed room in Uncle Gerald's house. We were two broken teenagers trying to seem like adults. Norman with his wound still healing, me with nightmares that made me wake up screaming almost every night. We had no documents. They had been left behind in Dale's house. We had no skills beyond those learned on the farm. We had nothing but each other and some savings stolen from a dead man. "You need new identities," Uncle Gerald said one night, speaking softly so the children wouldn't hear. "If someone is looking for you." We didn't talk openly about what had happened to Dale. It was a secret too heavy to share, even with someone as kind as Norman's uncle. He clearly suspected something. The worried looks, the way he checked the newspaper every morning for news from Crestview. But he never asked directly. Perhaps he understood that there are truths it's better not to know. With the help of a friend who worked at the registry office, Gerald got new documents for us. They weren't exactly forgeries, more like accelerated identities. Birth certificates of children who would have been our age but had died as babies, now used to create new ID cards. It was illegal, of course, but at the time it seemed our only option. Thus, Eleanor Jane Harrington died, and Eleanor Ellie Oliver was born, supposedly Gerald's niece from the countryside. Norman Harrison disappeared, and in his place emerged Norman Oliver, another orphaned nephew. The similarity in surnames made it easy to explain why we were always together. The work at the auto shop was hard for Norman. He came home every night with hands black with grease, eyes red from diesel oil, body exhausted. But he never complained. "It's an honest tiredness," he would say, rubbing his hands with that special paste to remove the dirt. "I prefer this 1,000 times to one day on that farm." I worked at Mrs. Candace's atelier, a Portuguese lady who had the best sewing shop in the Riverside neighborhood. I started sweeping the floor and organizing scraps, then learned to do basic basting, and finally came to embroidery, discovering a talent I didn't know I had. My hands, which before only knew the hard work of farming and forced domestic tasks, now created small works of art in linen and cotton. "The girl has a gift," Mrs. Candace would tell customers, showing my embroideries of tiny flowers and delicate birds. Fairy fingers. For almost a year, we lived like this, working, saving, trying to forget. We behaved more like siblings than a couple. We slept in separate rooms at the uncle's house, talked about day-to-day things, rarely mentioned the past. The trauma we shared created both a bridge and a chasm between us. At night, when the nightmares came, I muffled my screams with the pillow so as not to wake the whole house. Sometimes I heard Norman walking in the hallway, insomnia, tormented by his own memories. Occasionally we met in the kitchen during these sleepless nights, made a chamomile tea, and sat in silence, two damaged souls seeking comfort in each other's simple presence. It was on one of these nights, almost 10 months after our arrival in Columbus, that we finally talked about what had happened. "Do you regret it?" I asked, looking at the teacup instead of at him. I didn't need to specify what. We both knew. Norman was silent for so long that I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, as if the words cost a physical effort. "I only regret not doing it sooner. Not getting you out of there on the first day. Not having—" His voice failed, and I realized he was crying, silently, without sobs, just tears running down his thin face. It was the first time I had seen him cry since our escape. "It wasn't your fault," I said, finally finding the courage to touch his hand on the table. "You were his victim too. But I participated. He couldn't continue, the words stuck in his throat. Under threat, under terror. Neither of us had a choice. There's always a choice, he murmured. I could have refused, let him kill me, and leave me alone with him. It would have been worse. We were silent again, our hands still touching lightly on the worn wooden table. It was the most intimate contact we had shared since we left Crestview. I don't want that to define who we are, I finally said. I don't want to live the rest of my life as a victim, as a ghost. What do you want then? He looked at me directly, his dark eyes reflecting the single lit lamp in the kitchen. I want to live, really live. I want to build something that's ours, not his. I want us to be more than what he tried to make of us. That night, something fundamental changed between us. It wasn't a romantic or physical change. That would come much later, with much patience and care. It was a change in perspective, from two people united by trauma to two people consciously choosing to build a future together. 2 weeks later, Norman gave me the St. Michael keychain. I saw it in a store near the shop, he explained, clearly embarrassed by the gesture. The seller said St. Michael protects against all evil, that he killed the dragon that threatened an entire people. I thought that it suited you. It was a simple object, of already slightly worn silver metal. But it was the first gift I received in my new life, the first tangible symbol that there was a future beyond the nightmare we had lived. At the end of that year, we began looking for a place of our own to live. Columbus was growing rapidly in the 1960s, new neighborhoods emerging, opportunities appearing for those willing to work hard. With our combined savings, Dale's money had long since run out, spent on doctors and basic necessities. We managed to rent a small apartment in the Riverside neighborhood near the river. It was a tiny place, 1 bedroom, a living room that also served as a kitchen, a bathroom so cramped you could barely turn around inside it. But it was ours. The first space we could call home since the nightmare began. I remember the day we moved in. We had so few belongings that they all fit in 2 suitcases and some cardboard boxes. Uncle Gerald gave us a twin bed they no longer used, Mrs. Candace presented me with a set of sheets embroidered by her seamstresses. Norman's boss contributed a table and 2 chairs that were spare at the shop. When the door closed and we were left alone in that apartment for the first time, I felt a mixture of terror and freedom. Terror because now we were really independent without the protection of the uncle's family. Freedom because, for the first time in my life, I was in a space that was truly mine, where the rules would be established by us, not by others. That first night, Norman slept on the floor of the living room, insisting that I take the bed. It was like this for almost 6 months. He on the floor, or on the only worn couch we managed to buy at a thrift store, me on the bed too small for 2 people. It wasn't just a matter of physical space, but emotional space. We both needed to feel safe, in control of our own bodies and choices. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to bloom between us. It wasn't overwhelming passion. Neither of us was emotionally capable of that. It was something deeper, more lasting. A companionship rooted in mutual understanding, in respect, in conscious choice. We began to make small plans for the future. Norman talked about night courses to finish high school, maybe even try college someday. I dreamed of opening my own embroidery atelier, specializing in baby layettes and christening clothes. We talked about these possibilities while having our simple dinner, or walking along the banks of the Scioto River on rare Sundays off. It was on one of these walks, almost a year after we had moved to the apartment, that Norman held my hand for the first time. Such a simple gesture, so common for most couples. But for us, it represented a world of rebuilt trust, of barriers slowly dismantled. "Ellie," he said, stopping to look at the sunset over the river, "I think we should get married. Officially, I mean." I looked at him, surprised not by the proposal itself, but by its formality. "But we're already living together. For all intents and purposes, we're already a couple." "Yes, but—" He ran his free hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he had since he was a boy. "I want to do things right. I want it to be a real choice, not just a consequence of circumstances. I want you to have the chance to say yes because you want to, not because you have no other option." I then understood what he was really offering. Not just a marriage, but an affirmation of autonomy. A declaration that, from that moment on, everything we did together would be by choice, not by coercion or necessity. "Yes," I answered, squeezing his hand. "Let's get married." We were married in a downtown courthouse, with only Uncle Gerald and his wife as witnesses. I wore a simple light blue cotton dress that I had sewn myself. Norman wore the only suit he owned, bought in installments for the occasion. We had no party, no honeymoon, no elaborate photographs, just that solemn moment when we said yes to each other, this time by our own choice. Married life brought its own challenges. For the first time, we had to face physical intimacy as something desired, not imposed. It was a slow, delicate, sometimes painful process. There were nights when an unexpected touch would make me panic, throwing me back to that back room in Dale's house. There were moments when Norman would suddenly pull away, unable to continue, haunted by his own memories. But there were also wonderful discoveries. The tenderness that can exist between two people when there is no fear. The pleasure that arises naturally when it is not demanded or forced. The security of falling asleep in the arms of someone who respects your boundaries and understands your scars. "It's like relearning to breathe," Norman said once, after a particularly beautiful moment between us, as if we were rediscovering something that should always have been like this. In 1962, I discovered I was pregnant. The news hit me like lightning, half joy, half terror. A baby, a new life, innocent, without the marks we carried, but also an enormous responsibility, a frightening vulnerability. "What if I don't know how to be a mother?" I asked Norman, my trembling hands over my still flat belly. "If I only know how to repeat what we lived through?" He knelt in front of me, holding my hands in his. "We won't repeat it. We'll do differently. Everything differently." Gabriel was born on a cold morning in June 1963 after a difficult delivery at St. Mary's Hospital. When I held him in my arms for the first time, looking at that little red, wrinkled face, I felt something breaking inside me. Not from pain, but from healing. As if a wall I had built around my heart finally crumbled, allowing this uncontrollable and frightening love to flow freely. "He's perfect," whispered Norman, touching with one finger the baby's tiny hand. "Look, he has your eyes." "And your chin," I replied, noting the resemblance. "And he was born free, without scars." "We'll keep him that way," Norman promised, a fierce determination in his voice. "Always." Motherhood transformed me in ways I never imagined possible. The instinct to protect Gabriel was so strong that it sometimes scared me. I would wake up several times during the night just to check if he was breathing. I imagined dangers at every corner, in every stranger who looked at the stroller. Norman joked that I had turned into a lioness, but he understood perfectly. He felt the same, just expressed it differently. With Gabriel's arrival, we needed more space. Norman had been promoted at the shop and now worked directly with the owner, learning not just mechanics, but also business management. I continued at the atelier, now bringing Gabriel with me. Mrs. Candace had arranged a small crib that stayed near my work table. Combining our efforts, we managed to save enough for a down payment on a small house in the Greenview neighborhood. It was an old house needing renovations, but it had 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, and most importantly, it was ours. Property registered in our names. Our new names, of course. I felt like a princess when I received the keys, as if those 4 worn walls were a palace. Gradually, we transformed that house into the home we never had. Norman fixed everything with his own hands: plumbing, electricity, the roof that leaked when it rained hard. I made new curtains, pillows, small details that made the space welcoming. Everything in light colors, lots of natural light, the opposite of that dark house in Crestview. One detail that many found strange: we didn't have large mirrors in the house, just small ones, enough to shave or apply lipstick. Nothing that showed the whole body, nothing that remotely resembled that mirror in the back room. "Why don't you have proper mirrors?" a neighbor asked once, curious. "We don't like looking at ourselves too much," I replied with a light smile. "We prefer looking at each other." When Gabriel was 2 years old, I became pregnant again. This time, the news brought mostly joy. We had already proven to ourselves that we could be loving parents, that the cycle of violence could be broken. Helena was born in March 1965, a girl with rosy cheeks and a calm temperament that contrasted with her brother's inexhaustible energy. "Now we're 4, Norman said on the night we brought Helena home from the hospital. Gabriel was sleeping peacefully in his room, exhausted after meeting his little sister. "A real family. We've always been a family," I replied, cradling Helena in my arms. "From the beginning. We're just growing, and we continued to grow." In 1967, Anthony was born, our second son, a smiling child with dimples in his cheeks that melted everyone's heart. And finally, in 1970, completing our quartet, came Laura, the youngest, so much like me that people often commented it was like seeing a photograph of me as a child. We raised our 4 children with unconditional love, but also with clear and consistent rules. Norman never, ever raised a hand to any of them, not even when they seriously tested his patience. I never used fear as a tool of control, never threatened or manipulated. We consciously tried to be the opposite of everything we had known in childhood. Respect was the word we repeated most at home. Respect for each other's space, for choices, for boundaries. The children learned early that no was a powerful word that everyone had the right to use, and that must always be respected. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the traumas resurfaced at the most unexpected moments. Once, when Gabriel was 6, he knocked over and broke a vase I greatly valued. My instinctive reaction was anger. I raised my hand, ready to hit. The look of terror on my son's face froze me in place. For a terrible second, I saw myself in that kitchen in Crestview, cowering in fear before Dale's anger. I slowly lowered my hand, trembling. "I'm sorry, son. Mom won't hit you. Never." Gabriel, confused by my reaction, just nodded. Later that night, I cried in Norman's arms, frightened by how easily I had almost repeated the pattern of violence. "But you stopped," he reminded me, stroking my hair. "That's what matters. You recognized it. You chose differently." It was true. Each day, with each decision, we were choosing a different path, refusing to be defined by the horror of the past, determined to create a better future for ourselves and our children. The 1970s brought new challenges and opportunities. Norman finally realized the dream of finishing his studies, attending a night school program, and then a technical course in business administration. I opened my own business, a small specialized embroidery atelier that quickly gained a reputation for the quality and delicacy of the work. The children grew, each with their unique personality. Gabriel, the protector, always looking after his younger siblings. Helena, the dreamer, lost in books and stories. Anthony, the joker, filling the house with laughter. And Laura, the observer, noticing details that everyone else missed. It was Laura, at 6 years old, who asked the question we had feared for so long. "Mom," she said one afternoon while helping me sort embroidery threads, "why do we never visit our grandparents?" I froze, my hands suddenly cold. The other children had already asked similar questions over the years, and we always answered with half-truths. "They live very far away. They're too old for visits. Maybe next year." But something in Laura's direct look, in those eyes so like mine, made me hesitate to repeat the same excuses. "Your grandparents are no longer alive, dear," I finally replied, carefully choosing my words. "None of them? Not Dad's parents? Nor yours?" "No, none of them." Technically, it wasn't a lie. My mother had died of pneumonia. My father had died years before when I was little. Norman's biological mother had also passed away long ago. And as for Dale, well, he wasn't really Norman's father, and he was certainly dead. "Is that why you get sad sometimes, when you think no one is watching?" The question caught me off guard. I didn't know my daughter had noticed these moments, the seconds of absence when a specific sound or smell transported me back to that nightmare. The nights when I woke up, frightened, and stayed on the porch until dawn, unable to return to bed. "Yes, that's why," I replied, my voice slightly choked. "I miss them sometimes." It wasn't completely a lie. I missed my mother every day, the woman she had been, the love she had given me, the possibilities that never came to be. I missed what could have been if Dale had never entered our lives. Laura nodded with the seriousness of a miniature adult. "It's okay to be sad, Mom. I was sad when my goldfish died, and that was just a goldfish. Your parents must have been much more important. I hugged my daughter tightly, fighting back tears. They were, dear, very important. As the children grew, the questions became more complex, more difficult to answer without revealing the complete truth. Why didn't we have photo albums from our youth? Why did we never talk about our hometown? Why did I sometimes wake up screaming in the middle of the night? Norman and I agreed to tell only what was necessary, that we had had difficult childhoods, that we had come to Columbus very young in search of a better life, that some memories were too painful to share. The children, with that special intuition that all children seem to have, understood that there were boundaries they shouldn't cross, and over time, the questions decreased. But as our children became teenagers, new fears arose. What if they had inherited something from Dale, even if only through the example Norman had been forced to follow? What if they carried in their genes or in their souls some seed of that darkness? We anxiously watched for signs: excessive aggression, disrespect for others' boundaries, cruelty. But our children were gentle, loving, respectful. Any problematic behavior was typical of normal adolescence: occasional rebellion, stubbornness, arguments about schedules and permissions. Nothing that suggested the darkness we feared. "I think we managed," Norman said one night, after all the children were already in bed. "I think we broke the cycle." "I still fear sometimes," I confessed. "Fear of what we don't know, of what might be hidden." "We'll always have fear," he replied, holding my hand. "It's part of who we are now. But we can't let fear define us, or define our children." It was true. Fear would always be our companion, but we had learned to live with it, to not allow it to control our choices or limit our lives. In the 1980s, our children began to leave home one by one, to study, work, build their own lives. Gabriel graduated in engineering, Helena in literature, Anthony chose medicine, and Laura, to our surprise, followed a military career, becoming one of the first female officers in the Air Force. The house became quieter, emptier. Norman and I found ourselves alone again, as in the beginning, but now with decades of shared history, with good memories far outweighing the bad ones. "And now?" I asked one night, while we had dinner in the kitchen that once echoed with children's voices and laughter. "Now we live for ourselves," he answered simply. "Now we reap what we've sown." Norman was right. After the children left home, we began to live an entirely new phase, perhaps the most peaceful of all. Our small house in Greenview, once cramped for 6 people, now seemed too spacious. We transformed the boys' room into a workshop for my embroidery, which had become more than a job. It was my therapy, my form of expression. The girls' room became an office for Norman, who, after retiring from the auto shop, began to write his life memoirs. Only the good parts, of course. The 1990s arrived with rapid changes in the world and in our family. Our children married one by one, began to have their own children. My Gabriel married Louise, an architect he met in college, and gave us 3 grandchildren: Matthew, Sophie, and Julia. Helena found her love in Paul, a history teacher, and they had twins, Victor and Daniel. Anthony took longer to settle down, always focused on his medical career, but finally started a family with Rachel, a nurse from the same hospital, having just one daughter, Marianne. And our Laura, always surprising, married Robert, a Navy officer, and they adopted 2 boys, Charlie and Edward. We became Grandma Ellie and Grandpa Norman, roles we embraced with joy, almost with relief. There was something redemptive about seeing those small, innocent children growing up in safe and loving homes. It was as if each hug, each story told, each afternoon spent at the park with the grandchildren helped to heal a little more of those old wounds that never completely healed. "Just look at them," Norman would say at family gatherings, when the house filled with voices and laughter. "Look at what we managed to create, Ellie. We didn't just survive, we thrived." In 1995, when we were well established in our grandparent life, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, addressed to Norman Harrison, his original name, which we hadn't used for almost 4 decades. The mailman delivered it without questioning, probably assuming it was just a typing error in the surname. Norman turned pale seeing the envelope. "How is this possible?" he murmured, holding the paper as if it might explode. Who could know? The letter came from Crestview and was signed by someone named Martha Schmidt, a name that meant nothing to us. The content was brief and direct. Norman, we don't know each other, but I was a friend of your biological mother, Elizabeth. I'm cleaning out my late aunt's house in Crestview and found some photographs and documents that belong to your family. Among them, a birth certificate indicating that you had a younger sister, born after your mother's death. I believe you should know this. If you're interested, please contact me. A phone number followed the signature. Norman and I looked at each other, stunned. A sister? How was that possible? His biological mother had died when he was 6 years old. How could she have had another child afterward? It could be a trap, I suggested, the old paranoia resurfacing. Someone who discovered something about what happened. After so much time? Norman shook his head. And who would care now? Dale didn't have close family, didn't have anyone who would seek revenge. So what will you do? He thought for a long moment. I'll call. I can't ignore this. The conversation with Martha revealed a story we could never have imagined. Norman's mother, Elizabeth, was pregnant when she died, something not even she knew at the time. She was rushed to the hospital after a domestic accident, a fall down the stairs that we later discovered was not accidental. And there the doctors detected the pregnancy while fighting to save her. Elizabeth didn't survive, but they managed to perform an emergency delivery and save the baby, a premature 7-month girl who was adopted by a family from Millfield. But how do you know all this? Norman asked, still suspicious. My aunt was a nurse at the hospital at the time, Martha explained. She kept the documents because she thought someday the girl might want to know about her origins, or that you, as the older brother, would have the right to know. And what happened to this girl? My sister? She was adopted by a family with the surname Harrington. According to what my aunt noted, they named her Eleanor. The shock was so great that Norman almost dropped the phone. From across the room, watching his expression, I felt a chill run down my spine. Harrington. Eleanor. My birth name. This isn't possible, Norman stammered on the phone. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Martha insisted. I have the documents here, including a copy of the birth certificate. Eleanor Jane Harrington, born on August 15th, 1943, my birth date, my original full name. When Norman hung up, we stared at each other for a long time, unable to process what we had just discovered. If what Martha said was true, and it seemed to be, considering the specific details, then Norman and I were biological siblings, half-siblings to be precise, but still, of the same blood. This explains why Dale chose us, Norman finally said, his voice hoarse. It wasn't coincidence. He knew. How could he know, if even we didn't know? He was my mother's stepfather, remember? He was the one who found her after the fall down the stairs. He must have known about the pregnancy, about the emergency delivery, about the adoption. And years later, when he saw you with your mother at the market, he must have recognized something. The surname, perhaps, or the physical resemblance. It was a disturbing revelation, but one that somehow made a morbid sense. Dale hadn't united us by chance. He had orchestrated everything, recreating a distorted family to satisfy his perversions. What do we do now? I asked, suddenly feeling lost. This changes everything. Norman came closer, holding my hands. It doesn't change anything that matters. It doesn't change what we've built together, the love we've shared, the family we've created. But we're siblings, Norman. Technically, our marriage, our children. No one needs to know, he said firmly. It's just one more secret for us to keep. One more piece of that past we decided to leave behind. I agreed. Because really, what alternative did we have? Reveal the truth now, after almost 4 decades of marriage, 4 children and 11 grandchildren? Destroy the family we had built with such care and love? No. Some truths are too heavy to be shared. We decided not to contact Martha again, not to seek more information, not to dig up any more of that past that had been left behind. What we knew was enough, a final and ironic detail of the bizarre story that had been the beginning of our lives. Maybe that's why we've always had such a strong connection, Norman suggested one night, weeks later, when we had already absorbed the initial shock. This understanding that goes beyond words. Maybe it's the blood. Or maybe it's simply that we went through hell together and survived, I replied. That creates a bond that nothing can break. He smiled, that gentle smile that had been my safe harbor for so many years. Either way, I'm lucky to have you. Life continued, with its ups and downs, its joys and challenges. In 1998, Norman had his first health scare, a minor heart attack that rushed him to the hospital. He underwent bypass surgery and recovered well, but the episode brutally reminded us of our own mortality. "We're getting old, Ellie," he said during his convalescence. "We won't last forever." "We're only in our 60s, I replied, trying to sound optimistic. We still have a lot of time ahead of us. But he was right, of course. Age was beginning to take its toll. Arthritis in my hands made embroidery more difficult. Norman's knees prevented him from taking the long walks we so enjoyed. We began to talk more openly about the end, not in a morbid way, but practically, preparing for the inevitable. "I want you to promise me something," he said one afternoon while we drank coffee on the porch. "When I'm gone, don't tell anyone about that night, about what really happened to Dale." "Why are you thinking about this now?" "Because I want to go in peace, knowing that our children and grandchildren will never know, that they'll be able to remember me as the father and grandfather I was, not as what Dale tried to turn me into." I promised, of course. It was an easy promise to make. I myself had never considered revealing the whole truth to anyone. Some stories are too heavy to be passed on. The 2000s arrived, bringing a new century, new technologies, new ways of connecting. Our grandchildren were growing up in a world so different from ours that sometimes it seemed we had lived on different planets. They with their cell phones and internet, we with our memories of a rural America where electricity was a luxury. "Grandma, let me teach you how to use the computer," insisted Matthew, the oldest grandson, already in college studying engineering like his father. "You'll be able to see photos of Aunt Helena's babies in Seattle without having to wait for her to send them by mail." I ended up giving in, of course. I learned to use email, to browse the internet, even to participate in that new site called MySpace, where all the young people were. It was fascinating. This virtual world where distances disappeared, where information was available instantly. But with this ease of information came also a new fear. What if someone decided to research about us, about our hometown, about the past we had left behind? What if some record of Dale's death, some old news, some official document revealed something we preferred to keep buried? I did search once, alone on the computer. I typed Dale Harrison and Crestview and 1959 in Google, my heart beating fast. But nothing appeared, just old phone books, rural property records, nothing about his death. It seemed we had managed to escape not just physically, but also from the official history. In 2007, our world shook again. Norman, now 66, began to feel chest pains more frequently. The doctors diagnosed advanced heart disease. The arteries were obstructed again, but this time in places that made a new surgery too risky. "How long?" he asked the cardiologist directly, while I held his hand tightly. "With proper medication and constant care, maybe a year, maybe more," replied the doctor, with that professional gentleness they use to deliver devastating news. "But quality of life will be progressively affected." We returned home that day in silence, each absorbing the news in our own way. It wasn't exactly a surprise. Norman hadn't been well for months, but hearing the sentence pronounced aloud made everything more real, more definitive. "I don't want the children to know how serious it is," he decided while we had tea in the kitchen. "Let's say I'm in treatment, that I'm improving, that it's just a matter of care. They'll notice, Norman. They're not children anymore. Even so, I don't want their lives disturbed. I don't want them waiting for the phone call announcing I've departed. I want them to continue living normally until it happens." I respected his wish, as I always did. When the children called or visited, we maintained the facade that it was just another health problem, something that would be overcome with time and medication. Only Gabriel, the oldest and most observant, seemed to suspect the truth, giving me questioning looks when his father wasn't around. That last year was a mixture of agony and beauty. Agony from seeing Norman slowly wasting away, increasingly weak, increasingly dependent on oxygen and medications. Beauty from each moment we could still share, each memory we revisited, each small pleasure we could still enjoy together. On an afternoon in May 2008, sitting in the backyard watching the first spring blooms, Norman held my hand with surprising strength for someone so debilitated. "I wish I had met you under different circumstances," he said, his eyes fixed on the purple flowers of the wisteria. "In a life where we could have been just a man and a woman who fell in love normally, without all that horror in between." "I'm not sure we would have fallen in love under normal circumstances," I replied honestly. "Perhaps it was precisely that shared horror that united us at first." "Maybe, but what kept us united all these years was love, Ellie. True love, built day by day, choice after choice." I couldn't disagree. What we had built, despite its tortuous beginning, was genuine. It was real. It was strong. Norman departed on a July dawn while sleeping. It was a peaceful passage, without pain, without drama, exactly as he wanted. He simply closed his eyes and didn't open them again, his hand still holding mine even in sleep, as he did every night. The funeral was as he would have wished. Simple, without ostentation, surrounded only by family and a few close friends. Our children, strong in their grief, each processing the loss in their own way. Our grandchildren, some already adults, others still teenagers, trying to understand the finality of death, and me, at 65, suddenly a widow, suddenly alone for the first time in almost 5 decades. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Gabriel asked me after the burial, when everyone had already left, and only the two of us remained before the freshly closed grave. "As if half of me had gone with him," I replied honestly. "I don't know how to continue without him, Gabriel. We were together for so long." "You'll find a way," he said, embracing my shoulders. "You always have. And you're not alone. You have all of us." He was right, of course. I found a way to continue, as I always had throughout life. The first months were the hardest. The empty house, the cold bed, the deafening silence where before there had been Norman's constant presence. But gradually, I created new routines, new rhythms. I returned to embroidering more frequently, despite the arthritis in my hands. I began to write a diary, not about the past, but about the present, about the small moments of joy I still found, about the visits from the grandchildren, about the flowers in the garden that Norman had planted and that continued to bloom even without him. The following years brought new joys and new challenges. I met my first great-grandchildren, the children of Matthew and Sophie. I lost Helena to a quick and devastating cancer in 2013, a pain I thought I couldn't bear, but somehow survived. I saw Anthony receive an important award for his research in pediatrics, Laura retire from the Air Force as a colonel, the grandchildren forming their own families, following their own paths. And in all these occasions, I felt Norman's silent presence beside me. Not as a ghost or a supernatural apparition, but as a deep certainty that, wherever he was still connected to me. "You know, Grandma," said Julia, the most sensitive granddaughter, during a visit, "sometimes when you're not looking, I see an expression on your face, as if you were talking to someone who isn't here." "Maybe I am," I replied with a smile. "Some people stay with us even after they're gone. And now, here I am, at 82, telling this story I've kept for so long. Why decide to share it now, after decades of silence? Perhaps because, coming to the end of my own journey, I feel the need to leave a record, a testimony. Not as confession or seeking absolution, I made peace with the past long ago, but as a reminder that it's possible to survive the worst kind of trauma and still build a dignified, loving, meaningful life. My children and grandchildren know only fragments of the story. They know I had a difficult childhood, that I lost my mother young, that Norman and I went through hard times before settling in Columbus, but I never told them about the true nature of Dale's cruelty, about the mirror in the back room, about that stormy night when we chose freedom at the cost of a life. And never, ever did I reveal that we were, in fact, siblings by blood. Some secrets are too heavy to be shared, even with those we love most. Some truths do more harm than good. I learned this throughout a life of difficult choices and unexpected consequences. The St. Michael keychain I mentioned at the beginning? I still carry it with me, though now it's worn, almost unrecognizable after decades of use. It's here, beside the computer as I record this video, a small talisman that reminds me not of the danger I faced, but of the protection I found. In Norman, in our children, in the family we built, in the life we chose to live despite everything. My dears who have come this far in this difficult story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your attention and kindness. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. This grandma here, with all her wrinkles and invisible scars, leaves one last piece of advice. No matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. No matter how deep the well into which you've fallen, there's always a way up. And no matter how broken we are, it's always possible to gather the pieces and create something new, something beautiful, something worthwhile. Life is stronger than pain. Love is stronger than fear. And choice, the ability to decide who we want to be, despite what was done to us, is the most transformative power we possess. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, God willing.